career discussion. I know Chris is driving, and I have his slides, so I don't. Whoever of you want to go first, and then we could take a little break after both of you go. I'll discuss the assignment, and then we'll leave the rest of the time to discuss the paleoseismology.
Yeah, the paleoseismology and the trenching can just come at the end, you know, however much time's left, and I can go quick through that. And then my career talk is, I don't know, it's like 25 slides or something like that, but I could probably blast through it in about 15, 20 minutes or half hour, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I also want to leave a few minutes for questions.
Just cut me off whenever, you know, I'm happy to go first if that works for you.
Chris, do you have a preference? Well, he's silent, so I guess it's up to you, Rich. Or...
Hey, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Oh,
yep.
Yes.
Is my connection clear?
Yes. Would you like to go first?
I'm calling in from the road. Yeah, I'm on the road, so I'm just calling in, but I'd like to give my presentation first so I could get back on the road, if that's possible.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
So I'm showing
so
slides.
Okay, what slide are you on? Because I can't see any video feed. Are you on the title?
First one, career path presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So next slide.
Yes.
Okay, everyone, thank you. And sorry that I have to make this kind of rushed. I'm heading down to Rich's trenches in the Mojave at Ridgecrest. But I put together a few slides that highlight my career path, what I do for my job now, and just some thoughts of about the journey that may be relevant or interesting to you, or maybe even helpful. So this slide shows me climbing the career ladder with undergraduate at the bottom and my current position at the top. I'm mid-career, 23 years in, which when I calculated that out sounded really scary. I started at Occidental College, small liberal arts school in LA, getting a political science degree. And I think a lot of folks that get into geology are doing something else and then take their first geology class and then do a 180-degree turn, like my arrow, and continue with geology. I finished my political science degree and also got a double major in geology. And after that, I was really burnt out. So I took a couple years off doing non-geology things. I drove a bread truck in Colorado. I saved up money and I went to India and worked for the Tibetan government in exile, doing political science type stuff. And then at the end of that, I hiked across the Himalayas from the Indian plain to basically the edge of the Tibetan plateau, you know, really falling in love with the geology there, which guided some of my future schooling. And after that, I was really jazzed to get back into geology. So I went to Central Washington University and did a master's degree working on the Hector mine rupture. It's the earthquake in 1999 in the Eastern California shear zone. And I was looking at why did the rupture stop at the south end? Just kind of petered out right before my fault, which was right along strike. Fault that I studied was the Mesquite Lake fault, so I trenched it. And there was a relatively recent event on that fault that maybe there was not enough strain built up after that event for the Hector mine rupture to continue. In my master's, I met a lot of people. I met Tim out on the Hector mine rupture. I met Steve Thompson. I met a lot of future mentors. During that time, I also met Ramon. And right after my master's, I got a job at a consulting firm in Los Angeles called Earth Consultants International. It was a pretty unique firm because it did earthquake geology in support of building and development, but it also had a strong research bent. The owners were a mix of consulting geologists, but also university professors. Terry C. was part of the company, Tom Rockwell, Bob Yates. And so all the projects that we worked on, at least the bigger ones, they had this research aspect to them, which I thought was really interesting. I really liked doing that. From Earth Consultants International, I went into a PhD. I worked at ECI for 6 or 7 years and wanted to go back to school. I liked being at a university. I was thinking of becoming a professor. And I had an opportunity to work in the Indian Himalaya. I worked in the Western Himalaya and Pakistan, looking at the Himalayan frontal thrust, earthquake potential on that structure, and then also structures to the north, secondary faults to the north, to see what their earthquake potential was. At the close of my PhD, I was lucky to get hired by Pacific Gas and Electric, and I've been there about 6 years now. So circuitous career path. I guess I'd mentioned that I thought of being a professor. After being in school for a while, I was drawn back to the consulting world. I really like the idea of doing earthquake geology in support of planning or development or figuring out the hazards for infrastructure. Next slide, please. So my career focus has been on characterizing faults for seismic hazard assessment. Early in my career, Earth Consultants International, my master's, I focused mostly on fault location mapping, using paleoseismic trenching to determine fault slip rates, timing, and amount of displacement from prehistoric earthquakes. Later in my career, which I'd characterize as now, I'm focusing more on deterministic and probabilistic seismic hazard assessment for utility infrastructure. So this is looking at ground motions and fault displacements and how they affect that infrastructure and how we might mitigate those hazards. I also work on a variety of other things, which I'll show in later slides. As I said before, I like projects at the intersection of consulting work and research. And a really nice thing about the PG&E job is that there is some funding to do research to reduce hazard uncertainties, ground motion uncertainties, fault displacement uncertainties. Because if you're designing something and you have to take into account these really large uncertainties and account for really large ground motions or really large displacements that are just a function of the uncertainty, that gets really expensive. So it makes sense to spend money on research to reduce those uncertainties. Next slide. I thought I'd highlight one of my favorite projects along my career path. This was when I was at Earth Consultants International. And this was working on the Panama Canal expansion. You may have heard it when it was going on in the news. This was early to mid 2000s. It was completed around 2014. There was no understanding of active faults in the vicinity of the canal zone. And ECI was involved in a multi-year project to do desktop and field mapping. Desktop mapping exactly like what you're doing for these projects now. The only difference is this is dense jungle, and it was really hard to see through the triple layer jungle canopy. So you had to get your boots on the ground and go muck around with snakes and lots of fascinating critters. Ultimately, this moved to paleoseismic trenching to constrain activity of faults. We found multiple active faults, including one that crossed the new canal expansion. And we characterized displacement per event. Lots of people were involved in this project. Tim Dawson was involved in the earlier stages. Steve Thompson came out as a reviewer. His company was hired to review ECI's work. And one of the most interesting things we found was that the Pedro Miguel fault, this is the vertical fault in the lower right corner that crosses the canal. It had 3 events in the last 1,600 years, and greater than 2.1 meters in the last event right next to the canal. And so that map at the lower right shows in kind of light black lines a bunch of trenches. So they're labeled B, C, D, E. And what we were doing is tracing out a channel. There's right next to the canal zone. And the channel crossed the fault, and it had 1.7 to 2.2 meters of offset along the fault. And then there's a beheaded channel in blue below that. Another really fun part of this project was that a lot of folks didn't believe these results. We had about 100 trenches and replicated these results in multiple trenches. But the smoking gun was looking at a Spanish trail that was developed to carry treasure in the 1500s and 1600s from South America to ships that would go back to Spain. And this trail was paved with river cobbles through the jungle, and it still exists, the Camino de las Cruces. And it crossed the fault, and it was offset by the fault. And Panama City was destroyed by an event in 1621 that everyone had attributed to an offshore earthquake. And this trail that was built in the late 1500s was offset by that event. There were no other large events after that. So that was just an awesome project. Next slide. So I've shown this slide before, I think on my first talk, just reintroducing you to the PG&E Geosciences Department. We're an in-house group of 20 integrated geosciences experts, geologists, geotechnical engineers, geophysicists, seismologists, civil and structural engineers. Our group was formed to manage a long-term seismic program for the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. It was an operating license commitment. This came about from active faults being identified offshore near the plant during design of the plant. So written into the operating license was that there would have to be a geosciences department that kept abreast of recent findings and evaluated seismic hazard for that facility. And this grew out to support the entire company. Next slide. PG&E has many facilities throughout California. Again, we're from north of LA to the Oregon border. We've got 1 nuclear power plant. We used to have 2. There's another one up in Northwest California that was decommissioned. And Diablo Canyon's going to be decommissioned in 2025. We have 170 hydro dams, most of them in the Sierra Nevadas. We have gas storage fields and other critical facilities throughout the state. And we have a lot of linear infrastructure. So water conveyance in the hydro system. So these are canals and tunnels. Thousands of miles of electric transmission and gas transmission lines, and tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of distribution gas and electric lines. So in a state like California that has a lot of geologic hazards, there's a lot of exposure of our facilities to these hazards. So it's really helpful to have a geosciences staff that helps look into those, but we're a small group. We can't do it all on our own. So we hire a lot of consultants to work with us, and we coordinate closely with agencies. Like I work closely with Tim just to understand fault hazards in the state. I thought instead of just giving a list of my duties, I would just give a list of what I did yesterday. That should give you an idea. So next slide. The slide should say duties on the left.
Yep.
So I started my day yesterday writing a memo on maximum credible earthquake selection for a transmission tower upgrade near the Hayward Fault. I had a meeting to review proposals for 2021 pipeline fault crossing studies in the Eastern California shear zone. We do these regionally, so next year we're going to be doing dozens of crossings. We've got 2 main trunk lines that cross the entire Eastern California shear zone and are crossed by every fault in the zone. And so for proposal review, I'm looking through proposals from geology consultants that will do the fault characterization, pipeline modelers that will model the response of the pipe to fault displacement, and come up with mitigation options if needed. I had a meeting to review results of a 1.5-year-long regional INSAR monitoring study in Northern California to look at landslides near gas transmission lines and see if the landslide rates changed from winter to summer and what their rates were. We had a meeting to discuss scope and schedule to develop an update to our seismic source model for Northeast California for our hydro system. I developed a map for a sensitivity analysis to look at the impact of the spatial variations in the use of ground motion prediction equations for normal fault earthquakes. So we have a different ground motion prediction equations that we use in different parts of our system for normal faults versus strike slip and reverse. And we're just looking at what happens if we move that boundary around, what's the impact on hazard. I reviewed a proposal for a workshop to standardize post-earthquake mapping and data collection based on lessons learned from recent earthquakes. I did a review of structural complexity mapping for a new fault displacement hazard analysis model that I'm working on. And also did research on potentially active faults near a gas transmission line near San Jose. So that's one day, and it shows the breadth of what I do. It's all office work, but I don't always stay in the office. In the last couple of weeks, I've gone to the Central Valley to look at ground cracking above one of our gas transmission lines, thinking that it could be related to valley subsidence. Looks like it was just due to backfill compaction. I spent a day going along the Hayward and Calaveras faults, looking at places where the faults cross our gas pipelines and looking for evidence of creep at the ground surface, because we monitor the rate of creep and whether creep is knife-edged or distributed at our gas pipelines. I spent a day mapping landslides around the East Bay near our gas lines. So I spent a fair amount of time in the field as well. And today I'm heading down to Ridgecrest to look at fault trenches. The Ridgecrest ruptures, as you saw in an earlier presentation, affected our gas lines. So it's really important to understand the recurrence interval of those faults and their connectivity to other faults. Like, for example, could the faults that ruptured in Ridgecrest connect to Eastern California shear zone faults to the south across the Garlock Fault? Next slide. So some lessons learned, and I was thinking about this, what would be useful in a career talk. So just wanted to tie some of these lessons learned to my career path. You know, when you're early in your career, when you're an undergraduate or a master's, you may not have a lot of work experience yet, but something that's really important is attitude and resilience. You know, being able to work through problems. What we do in the geosciences is not easy. You're potentially out in the field running into problems. There's always issues, and just finding paths through those tough times and coming up with something at the end is just really important. And positive attitude is, in some cases, more important than experience, especially early on. You can be trained to do whatever your company does if you go into consulting. But it's really better to work with people that have positive attitudes. Next slide. Experience you will get this all throughout your career. With geosciences specifically, it's really hard to learn it out of a book or a paper. It's so important to get out there and see as much as you can, especially early in your career. It's relatively easy when you're in school. You take a lot of field trips, but don't stop doing that when you leave school. There's a lot of opportunities for field trips at conferences or professional societies. Association of Engineering Geologists has sections throughout the country and run awesome field trips. And it's a great way to meet people and just learn about different things. When you're early in your career, try and do as many different types of projects as you can on the consulting side. You may not ever do that again, but it looks good on your resume, and it exposes you to what's done in the industry. And I still go out every chance that I get to go learn new things. I mean, that's one of the reasons that I'm going down to Ridgecrest right now. There's a trench exposure. They're not open that frequently. So I need to go down there and look at it, because it'll be a lot easier to learn in the actual exposure than reading the paper that comes out later. Next slide. I wanted to emphasize a couple of things. Experience is compounded when you have a good mentor to guide you along the way. So you can go out and see as much as you can, but if you have a mentor that guides you along that path, it is so much better. It's good to have someone in your career, especially earlier in your career, to say, you're doing that wrong. You need to do this differently. Here's the way, here's the standard for doing this. Here's the way you should do it. Again, this isn't something you can get out of books or papers. Find mentors that not only know a lot, but are willing to work with you. And they also serve as guides for what you can do with your career. All along my career, I've looked at professors or consultants and say, I don't really like where that person ended up, or I'd really like to be doing what that person's doing. Connections are really important. They can help you get jobs, but I also mean connections like the people that you meet along the way. If geology is a pretty small group of people, and things like active tectonics or fault studies for consulting, that's a really small group of people. And so you'll be working with these people the rest of your career if you stay in that niche. Tim, I worked with at school, I've worked with on research projects. I still work with him. Steve, I've bumped into him throughout my career, and I work with him on projects now, and it's 20 years later. So these folks will be with you your entire career if you don't switch to something else. Next slide. Cycles and timing. So as you finish school and you're looking for a job, there may not be a job. The industry works in cycles, both in academia and in industry. There's hiring and firing based on how the economy is doing. There's hiring and firing based on retirements. So if you want that perfect USGS job or perfect consulting job, it may not be there right when you get out, but it could be there in 5 years. So keep a positive attitude. In the last 10 years, a lot of folks have retired from USGS and CGS, California Geological Survey, and there have been a lot of hires when before then there weren't hires for quite a while. So just keep in mind that there are cycles. And when you have a job, it may not always be stable based on the economy. So I've noticed that consulting firms have 5 or 10 year cycles where they ramp up for work, and then sometimes there isn't work and they ramp back down. Some of these cycles are driven by events. The Tohoku earthquake in Japan generated a lot of work in the US to evaluate nuclear power plants, a lot of studies. The Oroville Dam flooding event or erosion event, it generated a lot of work to characterize what happened. And those are few year cycles, 3 or 4 year cycles of ramping up, doing the work, and then finishing the work, and then something else comes up. Next slide. Lastly, have fun. All along the way, I've tried to take vacations while doing research. If I'm traveling abroad, I'll try and add a week and just explore the area around me. For my PhD, I biked across the Himalayas to get to one of my field sites. It took a few weeks to do that, just to smell the roses along the way. And that just made the experience so much better. Ramon knows that that's my MO. I biked with my wife to his Carrizo Plain trenches just to see what was going on out there, and then continued on my bike trip. So geology is a great way to mix work and fun. But what I didn't put here, and I forgot to, is work-life balance. One thing that I've had an issue with is I find geology fun, but it's also my job, and it really blurs the lines. And later in life, when you have kids and lots of commitments, that could be problematic. So it's also good to put up barriers between your work and your personal life as well. So that's my last slide. I'm happy to answer questions.
Great, thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, that was nice.
Students have any questions that they'd like to ask Chris about his interesting experience and career path?
Yeah, what ways have you put up like barriers between your work and your real life, I guess?
I don't think I've been that successful. So, my family still goes out to my family still goes out to fault ruptures for vacation. So I haven't been that successful. But a couple years ago, I was noticing that these fun geology vacations were starting to seem a lot more like work. So I'm still working on that. I don't have the answer for you yet. Maybe Tim does a better job at that.
Yeah. I think it helps because I'm not married to another geologist. I think I'd be geology all the time if I was married to a geologist. Yeah,
I'm married to a fellow paleoseismologist, so it's just what we do all the time. So part of that could lead to burnout. We don't feel burned out yet, but.
How about your cycles? What do you think about, like, during times when there's not work? What do you do during that?
Sometimes you're just unemployed. So there's more nuance to this. When I was at Earth Consultants International, for example, that firm focused a lot on Alquist Perillo studies, fault studies for development of basically track housing in the LA area. And so work really dried up in the mid 2000s, or around 2008 when the big crash happened. People weren't building anything, and so there wasn't a lot of that kind of work. So what you have to do is diversify. You need to find other skill sets that are wanted at that time. You could also turn to research. So when you're a consultant, you can put in proposals for NEHRP studies, a National Earthquake Hazards Reduction Program. You don't live large off of those salaries, but it brings in a little money and you get to do a little science. But yeah, I'd say diversify or find some aspect of the industry that may be impervious to economic changes. What helps me right now with PG&E and what insulates that a little bit is that the work that I do for PG&E, a lot of it is regulatory commitments to keep our infrastructure safe. So it has to be done. It can't not be done. So, you know, at least recently, I haven't had any gaps in employment, but I have had them in my past.
Interesting. So when you turn to research, are you saying like specifically through a university, or is that thing you've done on your own?
You can do it through your company. There have also been cases where you get adjunct positions at universities. I guess another thing about the consulting industry is if you're working all the time, you're not writing proposals. And so when that work's done, you don't have any work to do. So it's a balancing act between doing the work that's on your plate, which can be overwhelming, but always marketing, always writing proposals. A lot of them aren't going to be funded, but some will, and you always need to have those irons in the fire so that a year down the line, you have projects to work on.
Right on. Thank you, Chris.
Okay, I want to leave time for Rich and also Rich Crest slides. So feel free to email any other questions. I'd be happy to answer them, and I'll get back on the road.
Great, thank you, Chris.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, okay, thank you. Talk to you later. Bye.
Yep.
All right, Rich, you should be able to share your screen.
Okay. Let's see. Share screen. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, that was awesome. Listening to Chris and also listening to Tim and Steve the other day. It's really interesting, like, you know, we have very parallel career paths. And so, you know, we link up together on things through time, but always we're all moving forward through our careers. And it's just really cool to hear how everybody got there. So I just call this a circular path of geologic adventures through consulting, state service, and academia. So all of our backgrounds, all the instructors are similar, but different in our own kind of unique ways. So I've kind of been lucky to go through several careers along the way. In general, they've been in like 5-year intervals, including my PhD, which was a 5-year thing. So maybe I get a little bit bored after 5 years and have to do something else. And so hopefully that doesn't happen with my current position because I hope I'm here to stay. But it has brought me a lot of variety in my work through time and kept life really interesting. So I just wanted to share some of the highlights, where I got, how I got to where I am now. And feel free to interrupt me anytime along the way. And this presentation will be similar to the other career talks. And in a sense, you know, I have my resume and some highlights along the way and kind of tell you about what I do now, what types of projects I'm involved now, and sort of what you need to do to work there, and finish with a little bit of sort of advice on what helped me get there. So let's see, advanced slides. So I just wanted to start with this little picture up on the right. That's the Lone Paraded earthquake, and I mentioned this before, but I was an environmental studies major at UC Santa Cruz when the earthquake happened in 1989, and that sort of got me clued into this kind of earthquake hazards thing. I figured if I could get a job in California doing hazards, whether it be landslides or earthquakes or something like that, that would make me happy. And I knew there would always be work somewhere around California along those topics. At Santa Cruz, I got my first taste of consulting. One of my professors had a consulting company, so I was hired a lot to do sort of field work, like surveying on the beaches and the rivers in Santa Cruz, which was really great, but it also kind of just showed me, learned a little bit about kind of the consulting side of things. And Chris mentioned taking some time off. After I graduated, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I spent 2 seasons as a snowboard bum in Tahoe, just, trying to figure out where I wanted to go. But my break was also geology focused in that I volunteered to do some work with the Forest Service, mapping caves on Prince of Wales and Doll Islands in Alaska. So that was a summer gig where they paid my way. They didn't really pay me any salary, but we got to map underground, which was really pretty interesting, kind of dangerous. I didn't like the danger aspect of it, but the adventure aspect of it was really awesome, kept me kind of involved in doing geology. And so that gets back to just take opportunities when they present themselves to you, because you never know what they might lead to. That cave exploration job, ended up transitioning to another several week cave adventure in Guatemala at that time. After kind of bumming around a little bit for a couple of years, I actually rode my bicycle back from Alaska and was just enthralled by the geology along the way, and felt that I really needed to get back into some more focused studies. So I rode my bike basically to Humboldt State University and rode right into Gary Carver's office and said, I want to go to graduate school here. So that started a couple of years of graduate work in Humboldt, where I mapped faults, worked on marine terrace geology. And so an aspect of graduate school and the master's level, and even in undergraduate for you guys, is that really take advantage of your fellow students and what they are working on, where you can go out and help them in the field for a weekend or a week or whatever. You can really expand your horizons and learn a lot. So at Humboldt State, I had the opportunity to work on, soils and some kind of quaternary evolution in the Central Valley. Got my first taste of normal faults in Eastern Oregon and along the Steens Mountains. Worked all up and down the Coast Range, in the Klamath Mountains on volcanic rocks, all these things that I wasn't really super interested in, but my friends were, and sort of it really expanded my horizons. So kind of during and once I finished up at Humboldt State, I didn't know where I was going to end up, but I knew I wanted to work for William Lettuce Associates, the company that Steve works for now, which is now Lettuce Consultants International. But as Chris said, there's lulls in careers, and there wasn't work there. So I had to find something to do. And so I spent my time trying to become better at being a paleoseismologist, better at working in trenches. So I volunteered with the USGS on trenches in Seattle, and we talked about that on Bainbridge Island when we did the reverse faulting exercises. And that led into several years where they brought me back every year, and I just built my experience that way. There was also a lot of money was involved with salmon restoration in Northern California. So if there wasn't a job doing engineering geology or consulting geology in the Bay Area where I was from, where I wanted to get back to, there was a lot of work in the watersheds and in the woods. So I worked for several companies, a timber company and a natural resource management company, mapping roads and mapping erosion, and a lot of air photo mapping. But some projects were 30,000 acres where I had to characterize all the landslides through time, looking at different ages of air photos, which was just a really good experience, keeping my eyes tuned in to interpreting air photos, still doing a lot of field work. And also during that time, I did a lot of work with tsunami studies in the marshes of Humboldt County along the Cascadia margin, partially funded by PG&E because they have a decommissioned nuclear facility there. And so that led into doing some tsunami studies later, which I'll comment on later. And then finally I got a call one day, when can you start, from William Lettuce and Associates. We have a big project, 6 weeks in the Central Valley trenching for some dams that DWR wants to build, and when can you start? So that was a big project that got things rolling. They were able to hire me and bring me on. So I was a staff and project geologist there from 1999 to 2004. And I'll highlight some of that stuff. And then kind of I always wanted to get a PhD just for interest, and so I decided to go back and do that at some point. I figured I wouldn't ever do it unless I did it at the time when I did after I'd been at WLA for about 5 years. That led into work at the Alaska Geological Survey. I was there for 5 years, and then now back at Reno. And I'll just highlight kind of some things from all of those positions throughout this remaining time of this talk. So working at WLA was really a great experience for me. This is kind of the jurisdiction, the Bay Area. The office was in Walnut Creek, but all of these faults were within our purview. There's landslide hazards on all these mountains, these in the Coast Range. It's just a lot going on, and so there was some projects outside of the boundaries of this figure, but this was kind of like where it all went down. And all the major faults of the San Andreas system go through there. So I had the opportunity to work on all of them. So things that I developed there, field geology skills, mapping, drilling, working on logistics for field projects. Here's just some copies of trench logs and air photo interpretations that I did way back when. I developed skills in office analysis as well. It's not all field work, so working up cross sections, internalizing literature reviews and working those into proposals and final reports. So writing is really important. You want to practice writing as much as you can, but WLA afforded me the opportunity to actually write proposals as a junior staff, which was really important in my development. Also develop skills in presentations to clients and peers. So you can't talk enough. You want to be able to, present stuff to your clients and your peers so they can understand what you're doing. And that folds into kind of marketing and developing work in the future. And then also what was really nice at WLA is I was able to get into project and budget management pretty early on. We were able to write research grants to the U.S. Geological Survey, and we're allowed to sort of run those projects if you were involved in writing a proposal. And so you got a lot of skills early on in working up budgets and managing the project and managing the staff on a project. And those kind of carried on throughout my career to this day. There's just some pictures of some of the trench sites. These are, of course, dating me because you can tell that they're grainy old photographs, but really interesting things on the San Andreas Fault. There's these shutter ridges and linear valleys, that upper one on the left. The upper one on the right, the Calaveras Fault looking down strike, just, it's another linear valley, and the orange fencing shows where the trench is. The Hayward Fault is one place where it's really preserved because a golf course was built in the early 1900s at this site. But, these just show geologists down under the ground and working in adverse conditions in the field in the rain, having to cover up the trench exposure with plywood, etc. But lots of trenches. Other things we worked on, a lot of projects with PG&E actually, and that goes back to what Chris was saying about mentoring. Jeff Bockiver, he worked with PG&E before coming to WLA, and now he's back working with Chris at PG&E. But at that time, as a junior geologist, I approached Jeff and said, I know PG&E is a really big deal, and they're all over the state, and I want to work on some PG&E projects. So this is a penstock. It was since sold and it's run by somebody else, I believe, but it was run by PG&E at one point. So a penstock to bring water down through a turbine to generate power. And so we're doing slope stability analysis here. So the picture on the left shows the pipe going down the mountainside, and then some close-ups of the rock fall hazards. These are the ropes on the picture on the right that we were hanging off of when we were assessing this. And then some of the tilt meters are installed in the wall, strain meters. And so that's just a picture of me on rope taking notes. It was really a really fun project and important for hazard assessment. A lot of landslide work in the Bay Area. So I developed skills in working with drill rigs, describing core coming out of the ground. So here's a picture of sort of some landslide topography in the upper left, and then some housing developments built in a similar environment where you have landslide problems post-development. So we did a lot of work just assessing landslide hazards, drilling down, looking for the slide plane, figuring out ways to mitigate it, working with engineers, engineering firms in the area. Sometimes landslide full removal was done. So the geologists are there waiting for the dozers to come through and grind down through the landslide deposits, and we're just there to map when they start getting into bedrock. And so they will remove the entire landslide and then backfill it with engineered material to protect those homes that they were building. So interesting work. There was also some international work. I was fortunate enough to go to the Chi-Chi earthquake in Taiwan the year after. So there's this building is tilted along the fault scarp, a big reverse fault scarp. And then so is the channel. There's a little waterfall going across where the fault came across. Also worked on some pipeline projects in Turkey, the Baku-Tbilisi oil pipeline. So this is some trenches on the North Anatolian Fault at about 10,000 feet. This is the scarp on the left here of the 1939 earthquake. And there's actually some springs still bubbling out of the water right there. So fun projects. I'm not going to go into what I did with my PhD. I talked a lot about that during my talk on normal faults, but essentially just a lot of mapping and a lot of trenching of normal faults. But that parlayed into getting a job at the Alaska Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys in Alaska. Typical state geological survey, similar in some ways to kind of the infrastructure that Tim talked about for the California Geological Survey. But we had you know, an oil and gas division, we had a minerals division, we had a hazards division, and I was working as a hazards geologist for the engineering geology division, basically. Types of projects that I worked on there, hazard studies for large infrastructure, so oil and gas pipelines and dams for hydroelectric. Tsunami inundation projects. You have the Aleutian subduction zone capable of big tsunamis. And so we had a lot of projects where we would do tsunami modeling and inundation for coastal communities. I worked on the Quaternary Fault database for the state, which is now used by the USGS. And I'll show some examples of some of these in the next couple slides. A lot of Quaternary mapping, a lot of collaborative work with the US Geological Survey, mostly on the tsunami stuff. And then we provide a lot of technical review of probabilistic seismic hazard assessments that were done for a lot of the big infrastructure projects. So here's a couple papers on infrastructure corridors. So there's just a lot not known about these infrastructure corridors. There's only several highways in Alaska, and we were able to fly LiDAR along all of those highways and do studies in the summertime with helicopters flying along the routes of some of the gas pipelines and mostly the highways, which follow the highway. The gas pipelines follow the highways. But the main highway north-south goes from Prudhoe Bay to Anchorage, and it's shown in yellow line on this map. So I was able to sort of do helicopter surveys all along this route, about 900 kilometers for a couple summers. So we were looking at hazards to the proposed natural gas pipeline, hazards to the existing oil pipeline, and also just characterizing the geomorphology and just the geologic hazards along the way for any kind of community development, other kind of developments that might be going on. They want to know what the hazards are. Here's just examples of some of the mapping. So on the top, it's just standard Quaternary geologic maps. This is in the Tanana River Valley out sort of along the Richardson Highway. We're mapping glacial outwash deposits, some bedrock, but mostly all the Quaternary river terraces and such. River terraces become important because they're a source of gravel for road construction and things like that. And then down below, I oriented it east-west, but that's actually north-south. The gray shows the LiDAR footprint, and the red dots are just geologic hazard point observations. So this might be places where there's really intense polygonal ground or frozen ground, permafrost, maybe some landsliding, or possibly a rock glacier or something that's creeping. So these are all sites that we visited in the field, either from the highway or with the helicopter, and took notes and GPS points of exactly where these things are. So essentially, we're just taking an inventory of geologic hazards for several kilometers on either side of the highway. One of the big projects I worked on was the Quaternary Fault and Fold database. So this was not done. Some of you are familiar with the Fault and Fold database for the U.S. How am I doing on time? Okay, got a little bit. But Alaska didn't have one. And so we poured through hundreds of maps The original map from George Plafker from 1994 in the Decade of North America geology volume that was put out by GSA had sort of a neotectonic map of Alaska, but we went through and collected all the literature on all these faults and gave them sort of relative activity, historic all the way up to quaternary, which is purple. And in this database that's online, you can zoom in on each fault. Down in the lower right shows some of the different base maps that you can put on, click on and off, topo maps, DEMs, and whatnot. And then we also wrote a paper describing the kind of what's known about the paleoseismology and the neotectonics of the different faults in different zones across the state. That's kind of a companion paper to this database, which is now used by the USGS. So no talk about Alaska wouldn't be complete without some helicopter photos, but it's just some of the dramatic scenery along some of the infrastructure corridors that made the fieldwork really fun and interesting. Big glacial outwash plains. You don't really get an appreciation for glaciers until you see them in places like this, but some big topography. So, and then I think the last Alaska example I'll give is this is kind of ongoing today. Started with my experience back on my master's degree working on coring in the Cascadia margin, and basically, as Chris was saying, your ongoing collaborations with people who you've met along the way. I met Rob Witter at WLA, working at WLA, and he actually got his PhD on Cascadia subduction zone geomorphology and tsunami work, and he's now at the USGS in Anchorage. So based on the collaboration and knowing each other, we were able to continue to work. So we've been on about 10 islands over the last decade in the Aleutians with a team of sea level experts, paleoseismologists, diatom experts and whatnot, characterizing the frequency of tsunamis. So this picture of me on the left is an exposure cleared off where there's sands that are tan and brown is soils in between tsunamis. And there's rip-up class from the beach in there. This is about 1 kilometer inland. So we set up these camps. Here's just some pictures on the right of our camp and our gear, and some folks coring. But it's ongoing effort, and we're now starting to get a big picture of sort of the frequency of events along the subduction margin and use that as a proxy for the frequency of earthquakes. So now, fast forward to the future. I'm from California, so I wanted to come back to the state, and Reno was the closest place I could find a job at the time, and I'm really happy here. I actually work for 2 different departments at the university. I'm with the Nevada Bureau of Mines and Geology, your classic state survey, and also the Department of Geological Sciences and Engineering. So I do a mix of work between teaching and research and public service, and I still continue to do mapping. So just quickly in the last couple of minutes that I have, here's just a kind of an organizational chart. We're a small state survey, but we are involved in a lot of things on the regional and local level, mostly applied research, but all of the faculty at the Bureau also teach classes in the geology department. We work on geologic framework studies, just basic understanding of the, subsurface structure and sedimentology across the state. That's through our geologic mapping program. We have a geologic hazards program, which I run here with several other colleagues. We provide feedback to the local engineering community on fault studies and such, and we do studies of flood hazards and things like that. We have an economic geology group here, Center for Research in Economic Geology. It's largely has about 20 graduate students, and it's fueled and funneled through the mining companies in Nevada. So they're a big contribution to our program, and we contribute a lot of students to the economic geology companies when they graduate. We have the Great Basin Center for Geothermal Energy. So we have the most geothermal energy of any state really in the country. And so we have an active, vigorous research program going on in geothermal. The Nevada Geodetic Laboratory is here, and they process all the GPS data from the Western US and pretty much the world, but we also have our own network here in Nevada. We have a cartographic and GIS group that helps produce the maps, and we take care of a lot of advisement duties to other state agencies. And I'm kind of running out of time. I want to leave some time to show some pictures of the earthquake, but this is kind of what I do. I map, I teach, I do research, interact with local firms, and I do a lot of situational response to and rapid reconnaissance for earthquakes and floods and things like that. Here's just a couple examples of the mapping that some of the maps that I've been involved lately. It's a couple maps around Reno. This is the Granite Peak Quad just north of town here, where we map the faults and the quaternary geology, and we team up with people who map the bedrock to come up with some cross sections and final maps. This is 1 to 24,000 scale quadrangle mapping. Here's another one that we worked on in class, actually, the Washoe City Quad around the Mount Rose and Carson City fault systems. So you'll probably recognize this as the debris flows and the fault running along the left side of the valley there, as from our homework assignment on normal faults. But anyway, I mapped this. This was a couple weeks of field mapping and air photo and LiDAR mapping to come up with this state map product. And then, of course, you know, my bread and butter is studying faults and mapping fault geomorphology and, you know, the types of things we've been talking about in this class, and trenching. So here's a trench a student of mine did on the Peterson Mountain Fault north of town. Photo of us sampling for OSL over here. A lot of our trenches in Nevada are big and benched just because they're large scarps and we don't use shores. So we got to bench them for safety. And then finally, I know this is probably a good segue into the Ridgecrest stuff. We do earthquake response. So we collaborated with Tim and CGS, other colleagues at the USGS to evaluate, you know, offsets, kinematics of the rupture. This shows the M64 in blue in this map and the M71 in red that occurred in 2019. We also do a lot of outreach, so we produce little handouts like this so we can have legislative day where we go down to the Nevada legislature and, you know, give handouts and talk to kids in schools as well. So that's kind of another part of our work. So in conclusion, just some career advice. You know, this has been sort of highlighted by the other career talks, but here's just a few tidbits from my side. So although the job market's competitive, you know, rest assured there's plenty of opportunities out there. There's always work in geology. There's so much, it's such a varied career with so many different ways and paths you can follow that there's always work out there if you just hunt around enough. Try to surround yourself with expertise to learn from. I was first taught this at WLA actually by my boss, Bill Lettis. You know, hang out with people that you want to be like, or you want to do the kind of work they do. You know, learn how they got there by just paying attention and, you know, surrounding yourself by them. Try to get involved in their projects. You can volunteer, you can do internships, you can get on field trips, whatever you can do to just be around other people that do what you kind of want to do. This will broaden your experience and open new doors. Take jobs that interest you. You know, you always want to follow where you have fun or where you're most interested, but don't shy away from challenges or unforeseen opportunities, because you may find you like something about them that you weren't that sure about before. So it won't always be easy, but careers in the geoscience are definitely fascinating and rewarding. You make lifelong friendships, like a lot of the co-instructors in this class have become colleagues and friends of mine throughout the years. And it just, it's a lifetime full of interesting things to do. So that's all I have on that. I'm happy to take any questions and contact me anytime about job related stuff. You know, once this class is over and whatnot, I'm happy to talk to you about it.
Great, thank you, Rich. Do you have any
that was really nice.
questions?
I have another question.
Go for it.
Okay, so I work, I actually do consulting for the mining industry. Been doing it for 4 years, and I do it to help pay for my education, I guess.
Yeah.
But, so my big question is, with this industry, I'm gone a lot. Like I'll be gone 10 to 20 days at a time and then home for 4 to 10 days. So is that pretty typical with kind of this hazard assessment side of geology?
It can be. that's more typical of the sort of the mining industry, you know, when you go to a field site and you do some drill cuttings and whatnot, and you know, you're out in the field sort of longer. Although in consulting, I have been deployed, you know, for 6 weeks, like that first job I mentioned. You know, we would go home on the weekends, but basically I was gone for 6 weeks, and I didn't have a family at that point yet. But so it can happen in consulting geology and hazards, but not nearly as much as it does in the mining industry. So, I mean, you may be gone for a week or two or something like that, with the occasional month-long trip or something. But most of the time it's, you know, you're working not too far from home and you're gone for a week or something, and then you're home. So, and then you'll go months when you're not in the field at all, when you're writing reports and proposals and such. So I guess it just depends on the particular job, you know, and what their schedule is. But yeah, just make the most of it when you are home, because you could be sent out somewhere.
Yeah, no, for sure. I could definitely relate with what Chris was saying. You know, this work is awesome, super fun, but then it is hard to separate it from family life.
Yep. No, I mean, I go through the same thing too. Anything else?
I had one question, maybe all of you could answer, but we'll start with Rich, and that just is professional geology registration and what your thoughts are. You know, I'll just paste this in, you know, the ASBOG, you know, so this is the National Association of State Boards of Geology, which this kind of registration is required for practicing geologists. So I presume almost all of you are registered geologists, and what are your thoughts? Like, is that a good thing for students to motivate to do? There's sort of a fundamentals of geology exam they ought to take, and then after maybe doing some work one way or another, try to get an RG.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a good thing to do. It shows companies that you're motivated and you're moving forward, you know, on your path through your career. But you know, you can't take all the exams without a certain amount of experience and a letter from a supervisor or somebody you've worked for. So just demonstrating that you're, you know, motivated that way and you're heading that way is great. You know, I have mine, but I don't use it a ton because of my position in an academic institution. I just don't have very many opportunities to use it. You know, it's a good way to stamp my name on my books and stuff in my library. But they probably don't use stamps anymore. It's probably all electronic, but I have an ink, you know, an old ink stamp. But it's definitely a good thing to have. And you know, if you're going to be working in industry in any way, having a professional geology license is really important. It gives you that clout with everybody who you're involved with, right?
Right. And it's required legally for some activity.
Yep. Yeah, and different licenses are required for different things too. So you may have to go all the way to a certified engineering geologist to, you know, stamp off on landslide hazard projects, for example. But just having a professional geology license just shows that you've gone through a certain amount of training, a certain amount of schooling, and have a certain amount of field experience.
Yeah, this is Alex. Maybe I'll chime in on that. So like Rich said, you do need, I think for the PG in California, it's 3 years of experience that you would have. I think it's also 3 PGs recommend you to the board. And then again, that's for the PG exam in California. The ASBOG, fundamentals of geology, you can take right out of college. The benefits of having the PG and the CEG, in addition to what Rich said, is if you think you might want to do independent consulting where you're running the show, then you're responsible for stamping reports on your own. So if you guys want to dance that line of academia and consulting, then keep that in mind.
Yeah, and so sometimes you could do, like I do a lot of technical reviews and stuff like that, and if you're in court and stuff like that, sometimes your PhD can stand ahead of a license at some point, you know, depending on who your client is and what the case is. So, but it's just good to have a bunch of different letters. It always helps. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. State of California, the state's a little bit more strict with the requirements, and so if you do want to prepare a geologic report, it does have to be submitted with a, professional geologic report. It does have to be submitted with a PG stamp on it, and then extra certifications always help as well. So, and then at the state, I mean, basically everyone at CGS and most everyone who works as a geologist at the state of California in government service has licensure. That's just highly encouraged. But I think the other big motivator is that it actually gets you a significant pay raise.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
You go from like a lower range in the salary scale, you automatically get up to the next range with your license, because it shows that you're able to conduct independent geologic work.
Yeah.
So when I started at CGS, I never bothered with licensure because I was sort of, I thought about it, but I worked at the USGS where you don't need it for a while. And then when I was doing consulting, it was mostly international consulting, so you didn't need it there. But when I went to the state, I quickly got licensed because I wanted that pay scale raise.
I had a quick question. I see a lot about engineering geologists, and are those people mostly comprised of people who have engineering backgrounds and then focus on geology? Or are there any geologists that kind of make the jump into getting a CEG?
They're both, actually. There's engineering geologists and geological engineers. So if you're an engineering geologist, you have more of a background in geology.
To have a CEG in California, you have to have a PG plus a few years of extra experience.
Right, and generally you work with each other all the time, no matter what company you're working for. So the geologists will take the samples and tell you what site conditions are, and the engineers will run factor safety calculations and tell you what the potential of a slide damaging your structure is.
In California, the landslide evaluations and the factor of safety that Rich is mentioning, CEGs can sign off on that too. You don't have to be a PE or GE. So as you get into the CEG range, your permitted responsibilities cross over a little more with the engineers. Now, what you end up doing in practice can depend on your firm setup and how they allocate resources and skills.
Yep, that's true.
So I would like to spend probably the rest of the class, sorry, Rich, to go over the brief discussion of the final presentations.
Yeah, no problem.
And Rich, we've finished some of the check-ins a little bit early, so you may have time if you save your slides for either the